We're going to talk today about the chapter you read from the book Natural Born Cyborgs. And in particular, we're going to talk about a thesis called the Extended Mind Thesis. What we're doing right now is we're transitioning to a new topic in our course. And we've talked about ethics, we've talked about the existence of God, we've talked about epistemology even. Now we are going to talk about philosophy of mind. So these are questions about the nature of the mind, about the question of how the mind relates to the brain and to the body in general. Some big questions in philosophy of mind are: what makes up the mind? Is it ultimately just identical with the brain in some way? Physicalism about the mind. All there is the physical, so there's no special mindy stuff out there. Or on the other hand, maybe the mind is something of a totally separate kind from the brain, right? It is mindy stuff. It's not physical stuff. It's non-physical, whatever that is. And then, of course, if that's right, then we have another question, which is: how does the mind relate to the brain? Clearly, the brain has lots of interactions with our mind. Like if you hit me in the brain, it's going to make some changes in my mind. So how do we explain how the mind and the brain interact if the mind is this separate thing from the brain? These are the sorts of questions we're asking. And today we're starting off with a bang, so to speak, because we're considering a wild hypothesis that the mind can actually extend beyond the brain and in fact beyond the body itself. And that in fact my mind could reside on this piece of paper. But anyway, I've got these notes on this page, and according to the thesis we're considering today, my mind is partly in my head, because that's where I store a lot of information, but it extends at least partially onto this page where I have some notes for today's lecture. Wild. So, let's start with some examples. So let's assume that you need to remember the taxonomic ranks in biology. I don't know if y'all ever memorized this. So it turns out they go from very broad to very narrow, from domain to kingdom to phylum to class to order, family, genus, species. This is pretty much all I know, and honestly, to tell you the dang truth, I don't even have these things memorized. But suppose you need to remember them. Okay, so case one, maybe you just memorize them. I don't know, just kind of brute force it. It's like the way people memorize lines when they're actors. Well, actually, I don't even know how they do that. But probably some people just kind of go over them enough times that they stick. And you just kind of go over it enough times that it sticks. You remember domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. But maybe you don't want to do that, so you use a mnemonic device. Case two, dear King Philip came over for good soup. And obviously the first letter of each of those is the first letter of each of the taxonomic ranks. Or maybe you don't even want to do that. Maybe it's a little harder. So you're kind of a physical learner, so you use your fingers, not your thumbs. So there's 8 of these things, right? That I got 8 fingers and 8 ranks, and you just kind of assign one rank to each finger, and somehow that helps you remember it, okay? Case 4, you write the ranks down in your notebook and reference them when needed. Okay, so you carry this notebook around with you and you just write it down. That's an easy way to never forget these things. You get it in your notebook, and maybe even when you look at your notebook, it all kind of comes flooding back. And maybe even when you look at your notebook, all you need to see is the first letter. And case 5, finally, suppose you look it up on your phone whenever you need it, not somewhere where you've saved it to your phone, but you just look it up on the internet, where the internet is where I got this graphic to the right. I just kind of Google it. So of course you could Google it whenever you wanted, and in most cases that'd be pretty reliable, because when was the last time that those of y'all who have smartphones, I assume that's the vast majority of you, when was the last time you didn't have access to internet? I mean, it's very rare these days. Okay, so It seems like there's sort of a progression here. You kind of might maybe noticed as we move through these 5 cases, we're doing something. These are not just random. And it seems like what's happening is that in the first cases, you're clearly relying on your own mind for the information. You memorize it, or even in the case of the mnemonic device, maybe even the case of the fingers. But it looks like at least in the last 2 cases, and maybe the last 3 cases, you're not really relying on your own mind for the information. You've either got it in a notebook, or you're looking it up on the internet, or whatever. And there seems to be that intuitive difference. And as you go further up in the list, you're getting kind of more like you know it in your mind. And as you go down the list, you get less and less like it's in your mind and it's somewhere else. But Clark is arguing that there's really no important difference between these 5 cases. Because in each case, you have some tool that helps you perform a set of tasks, like answering questions on a test. Right? In each of those 5 cases, you could use, in the latter cases, it'd be against the rules, but in each of those cases, you could use either your brain or your fingers or the mnemonic device or the phone or the notebook to answer the questions on a test. Maybe you need to determine how a fox is related to a wolf. I mean, I don't know, just for your curiosity, or maybe you're like a wildlife biologist or something, I don't know. And you need to be able to reference this knowledge. You can do the same things whether this is in your head or whether it's on a piece of paper or whether it's on the internet. You're going to have access to the same information and be able to do the same things. Identifying a specimen in the field, same thing. Whether it's in your head or on the internet, those are the 2 ends of the spectrum. You're going to be able to do the same things, right? So what is the difference between having it in a notebook, at least a notebook that you always carry around, and having it in your head? So Clark is arguing that there's no important difference. Now you might say, what happens when you lose that notebook? What happens when you get rained on and the ink smudges? Or what happens when your phone falls in the toilet and you don't have it anymore? What happens when the internet goes out? What happens when the grid goes down? What happens when the nuclear holocaust happens? In those cases, there would be a difference, right? You'd have, if it was in your head, you'd still have it. But if it was in the notebook, you wouldn't have it anymore, right? So it's true that you can't do all the things in all the situations the same, whether it's in your head or in the notebook, because in some of those situations, you're going to lose it if it's in the notebook. At the same time, there are lots of situations where you're going to lose it if it's in your head, whereas you wouldn't lose it if it was in the notebook, right? If you get Alzheimer's, you're going to lose what's in your head. You're not going to lose what's in the notebook, right? So you may lose the ability to recall some knowledge that you formerly had, but you won't lose the ability to read what's in a notebook. So it's kind of give and take. And so it doesn't seem like you'll always, like you're going to be safer necessarily just by having it in your head in all situations, right? There's going to be some situations where you're safer having it in a notebook. But so Clark is arguing, look, in all 5 cases, you pretty reliably, kind of roughly similarly reliably, have access to the information and can do the same sorts of things with it. So what he thinks we can conclude from this is that your mind isn't just in your head. Now, there's a big step there, and we'll talk about that big step, how he gets from this sort of reflection on notebooks and phones to the claim that your mind isn't just in your head. But this is what we call the extended mind thesis. A human mind often extends beyond the brain and even beyond the human body entirely to inanimate structures and entities. So he's going to say, when you have that stuff written down in that notebook, at least if you can kind of pretty reliably access the notebook, that should count as part of your mind, right? And he'd challenge you and he'd say, well, why? Look, you might be reluctant to admit this, but what makes you so reluctant to admit this? Why be so committed to the claim that your mind has to be just in your head? Your mind has to be stored, mental states have to be stored in your brain alone, kind of more precisely put. Why think that? For example, if someone, this is why he brings in all the cyborg stuff. If someone had a chip planted deep in their head, Say we get, again, I don't know medical technology real well, but say that someone has some disease that kind of eats away a little part of their brain that deals with, I don't know, let's say short-term memory. Okay. And we, again, I'm kind of making this up as I go, but say we develop some technology, some little implant we can put in that brain that will kind of store short-term memory that they can recall. So it kind of gets them back to where they were before the disease. Okay. So now it looks like there's this little device, man-made device in their head, and it helps them form short-term memories. And so they can remember, the birthday party 3 weeks ago, and they can remember how they got to school and all this stuff. Okay, question, is that their mind? Are those their beliefs? Are those their memories? That's probably the best way to put it. The memory that they had their birthday 3 weeks ago, is that their memory? Seems like yes. And it's their memory, even though it's kind of stored, so to speak, in this man-made little device that's implanted in their brain. And so Clark says, what's this weird prejudice we have that once you move that, so let's take it, now let's say the thing is not implanted in your brain anymore, it's kind of like stuck on the outside of your head, right? We don't have the technology yet to get it inside your brain without killing you or whatever. Stuck on the outside of your head. It performs the same function, though. It helps you remember those things. It helps you remember that you had your birthday 3 weeks ago. Still, are those your memories? It's only like 2 inches away from where it otherwise would have been inside your head. But now it's just barely outside your skull. It's kind of stuck on there, maybe with a screw or something. I don't know. Maybe just some Elmer's glue. I don't know. Seems like it should still be your memory. And I guess why I say that is because it's still doing all the same things. It still gives you all the same feelings. It's just that it's moved like 2 inches to the right. Right? So surely whether it's moved 2 inches doesn't make a difference as to whether it's part of your mind or part of those are your memories. Okay, so now let's take a third step. Now it's something that you can hold in your hand that still helps, but it still helps you remember those things. You can still remember that your birthday was 3 weeks ago. So now it's just, 2 or 3 feet further. But let's say it's always in your hand. You keep it strapped there. I mean, whatever. Put in whatever explanation you want. Now it's always in your hand. So are those your memories? It helps you remember that your birthday was 3 weeks ago, just like it did when it was stuck on your head. It's just 2 or 3 feet further away from your brain than it was when it was stuck on the outside of your head. Seems like, again, the location really shouldn't make a difference if it's doing all the same things. Those are still your memories, right? And now it's at the point where Clark's going to say, okay, so now what's the difference between that thing you hold in your hand and your smartphone that takes pictures and helps you remember things? So if you have Alzheimer's and you don't have the memories and you just take pictures of stuff, and those pictures, help you know that you had a birthday 3 weeks ago, even though you have no direct memory of it. Why are those not your mental states? You admitted that the thing that you held in your hand that helped you remember that your birthday was 3 weeks ago, those things were memories. So why not the smartphone? This is his argument, that if we think that there's no good reason to think that something inside your head counts as a mental state, but something outside your head that performs all the same functions and roles is not a mental state or cannot hold your mental states. Okay, so that's the extended mind thesis. Now, you might have noticed in the background there is this view about mental states called functionalism. Functionalism about mental states, let me just read this, is the view that what makes something a mental state of a particular type does not depend on its internal constitution or what it feels like or the non-functional properties that it has, but rather on the way that it functions or the role it plays in the system of which it is a part. Okay, that's a complicated definition. Some of y'all, I would guess few of y'all, but maybe some, understand the kind of like mathematical definition of a function. A function is technically a set of ordered pairs. And some of y'all don't even know what a set of ordered pairs is, and that's cool. Most people don't. But a function is basically a thing that takes certain inputs and spits out certain outputs. So you can define a car factory functionally. It is the kind of thing that takes in car parts and spits out cars, right? But you can define functions more abstractly, right? Mathematical functions are functions, right? If you remember, when did you do this? Algebra, I guess. Lines, just like a straight line function. If you have a y equals x or f of x equals x, then I think what you're going to get is starting at the 0 on the xy axis, you're going to get a 45-degree line, if I'm remembering that right. And that's a function because if you put in any number, you'll get out a number, right? If you put in 1 for the x-axis, you'll get out 1 on the y-axis. If you put in 2 for the x-axis, you'll get out 2 for the y-axis. So functions can help us define lots of different things, from mathematical functions to factories to, and we'll give you a lot more. I'll give you a lot more examples in a minute. But functionalism about mental states is the controversial view. Not everybody thinks mental. So not everything can be defined functionally. We'll talk about that in a minute too. And mental states are one of those things that it's not clear whether they can be defined functionally. But functionalists think that they can. Functionalists about mental states think that you can define a particular kind of mental state in terms of what it does and what causes it. Okay? So that's the view. Now, if that's your view, we'll talk about this more. This is going to be kind of heady. Okay? So stick with me. But the broad outline of the view is, if that's your view, if what makes a belief is, what makes something a belief is what it can do, what role it can play, and what causes it, and that sort of thing, then of course words written on a piece of paper could be a belief, because they can cause the same sorts of things that the things in your head can cause. And they can be caused by the same sorts of things that the things in your head can cause. Okay, sorry. Okay, let's back up a little bit. Let's talk about some analogies. I'm going to go over here real quick and check to make sure that my microphone is still going. Okay, we're still going. Cool. So lots of things can be defined functionally, and lots of things can clearly not be defined functionally. Let's talk about those two categories. Let's do, so I got 3 examples of functionally defined things that are clearly functionally defined, 2 examples of things that clearly are not functionally defined, so that we can kind of get some context here. So thermostats are a really great example of something that can be defined and have to be defined functionally. They're not defined in terms of their color, right? Thermostats can be any color. Or what they're made of. They can be made of lots of different things: wood, plastic, metal, whatever. They're not defined in terms of what kind of building they're in, if they're in a building at all, etc. What makes a thermostat is what it does. Okay? A thermostat is something that senses the temperature somewhere and adjusts a system to correct that temperature to a preset baseline. So a thermostat is the kind of thing that if you put in a certain input, like 71 degrees, I'm thinking of this thermostat we have in the background here, it will spit out a certain output, like turning on the, I guess if it's, let's say you put in the input of 73 degrees, it senses somehow that the surrounding environment is 73 degrees. Output is it turns on the AC. Put in the input of it sensing that the environment is 72 degrees. Output is turn off the AC. And if a thing does that, it's a thermostat. You don't have to know what it was made of, or what color it is, or who it was made by, or whatever. If it does that, it's a thermostat. Or I guess I'll say, if it's supposed to do that, it's a thermostat. Because you could have one that's not currently doing that. It's out of batteries or something. It's still a thermostat. Okay, a seat. Very differently from a chair. This is a good contrast. A chair does not seem to be functionally defined. A chair is not defined as anything you can sit on, right? Rocks are not chairs. Okay, tables are not chairs. So there's some aspect of a chair, the definition of a chair, that is non-functionally defined. It has to have a certain structure, so to speak. But a seat, on the other hand, is basically anything you can sit on. The rock can be a seat if you can sit on it. Right? The ground is a seat if you can sit on it. I mean, that's the way, at least we often talk, right? Sometimes when people say seat, they really mean chair or something like that, and that's okay. That's the way language is. It's vague and fuzzy. But sometimes when we say seat, we mean something that is functionally defined. It's anything you can sit on. It doesn't have to have a certain structure or color or anything like that. Or constitution may be made of anything in particular. It's if you can sit on it, it's a chair. Cover in the military sense. Cover is basically functionally defined as whatever can stop bullets. I don't know, maybe it's whatever can stop small arms fire, right? You can have cover even though you could get blown up by a tank. You can hear my son crying in the background, by the way. So it doesn't have to be like when you learn what cover is, you're not learning, oh, cover has to be 3-inch thick steel. You're not learning that cover is whatever is constituted in a certain way, or cover has to be 3 feet high. You're not learning that. Cover is functionally defined. It's whatever can stop bullets from hitting, I guess, a human being. Okay, so it's whatever can play a certain role or serve a certain purpose in this case. Here's some couple of things. I've already talked about one. Chairs are not functionally defined or not purely functionally defined. Here's a couple others. Paintings. Paintings are not functionally defined. They're not just things that produce boredom in museums, right? They have to be produced in a certain way, be roughly two-dimensional. They have to have certain qualities, certain non-functional qualities, right? You can't just feed in inputs and get out outputs and define paintings that way, right? I could give you a functional definition of a painting, but it would be a horrible definition if I said a painting is whatever, whenever you feed in the input of being in front of it, it produces boredom. But that's a horrible definition. Or I'm kind of being smart alecky here, but like a better one would be something that when the input is someone looking at it, the output is they feel pleasure. But of course, lots of things do that besides painting, so that's a horrible definition. But we're not going to get much closer by trying to define it functionally. Paintings have to have certain non-functional properties. That is, properties that are not just about the role that the painting plays or the sort of things that it can do. Right? It has to be produced by a human, I think. Well, it has to be produced by an intelligent agent. It has to be produced usually on canvas. No, I guess it doesn't have to be on canvas to be a painting. Sorry, I guess murals are paintings. It has to be produced with paint, right? Etc. Okay, toys. Let me give you a horrible functional definition for a toy. It's anything a kid plays with, right? So but that's a horrible definition. If a kid plays with a gun, the gun's not a toy. So toys have to have certain other features that can't really just be reduced down to what they can do or what's done with them. And I don't know what those further features are. I'm just telling you, you can't define toys functionally, I don't think. Okay. So the view that mental states are functional states or can be defined functionally can work something like this. We could define certain different mental states according to the inputs and outputs associated with them. If you put in this input, you get this output. If you put in this input, you get this output. Maybe I should be clearer about these earlier cases, how that works. I was clear about the thermostat case. I think I was clear about the seat case. And I was clear how that doesn't work in the painting case. So I guess I was clear enough there. Okay, so a desire, how do you define a desire without talking about what it feels like, for example, to want something, or the kind of brain state that has to underlie it, right? So if you're a functionalist, you want to give a definition in such a way that you don't talk about the feeling of a desire as being essential, because that's not a functional property. That's nothing about inputs and outputs or what role it can play. That's about the feeling of being in the state. And you don't want it to be about like essentially tied to a certain brain state like C fibers, blah, blah, blah. this sort of thing happening in the brain is what makes something a desire, because that's about the constitution of the desire, not about its function. So what you want to say is something like this: a desire is a state, or a desire for something is a state that, when fed the condition of the absence of that thing, so the input is the absence of the object of desire, typically produces the pursuit of that thing. That's super abstract, but desire is the kind of thing that, or a desire, let's talk about the concrete case. You want a Dr. Pepper, you have the desire for a Dr. Pepper. What that is if you input, it's a state that if you input absence of Dr. Pepper, the output is pursuit of Dr. Pepper. That's what a desire is. And I totally just defined that thing in terms of inputs and outputs. When you get this sort of input, you get this sort of output, typically. Okay. And belief, the belief that there's Dr. Pepper in the fridge, is a state that if you feed the input of absence of Dr. Pepper in the fridge, you get the output of that state going out of existence. If you feed the input of there being Dr. Pepper in the fridge, you get the output of that state coming into existence or staying into existence or staying in existence. All right, so again, I just defined beliefs in terms of what causes them and what they produce, so inputs and outputs. Pain, state that caused by damage to the body, causes the belief that something is wrong with the body, causes one to try to remedy that damage. So again, it's about the sort of things that go into producing that state and the things that state produces. Okay, now note one totally independent that people like functionalism is it doesn't tie mental states to the particular constitution of a human brain. So a lot of people want to say that aliens could feel pain, even if their brains don't work at all like ours. A lot of people also want to say that it's at least possible that non-physical beings could have desires. Does God have desires if he exists? Well, at least God the Father, if you're a Christian, is not a physical being. Okay, so if he does, then it better not be that desires are essentially tied to the particular constitution of human brains. And similarly for beliefs and pains and things like that. And similarly with aliens, if aliens can have beliefs and desires and pain and things like that, but they don't have human-like brains, it better not be that those states are essentially tied to the constitution of human brain. And that's good if functionalism is true, right? Because lots of different kinds of brains and maybe even non-physical states could fill this functional role of a desire, for example. It could be that alien brains are made out of sweet potatoes or something, and they could still be the kind of thing that, in the absence of Dr. Pepper, leads that thing to pursue Dr. Pepper. Okay, this has not been a rabbit trail. This view, functionalism, is essential to Clarke's thesis because it has to be true. Let's look at beliefs in particular. Okay, so if a belief is the sort of thing that comes into existence on the condition that there is Dr. Pepper in the fridge, a belief that there is Dr. Pepper in the fridge, that is, that could, and goes out of existence when there's no Dr. Pepper in the fridge, that could be, that condition, all those conditions could be met if I have a notebook where I write down the things that are true and I erase them when I realize they're not true, right? So if I have a notebook and I say, okay, I'm going to write down here whenever there's Dr. Pepper in the fridge, and then when there's not Dr. Pepper in the fridge, I'm going to cross it out or erase it or whatever. Okay, well, if I do that, now I've got a state, even if I don't, say I've got some weird brain condition where I don't have any beliefs in my head, I've got a state, that is what's going on in the notebook, where it comes into existence when there's Dr. Pepper in the fridge. It goes out of existence when there's not Dr. Pepper in the fridge. Okay, and there may be other functional aspects to beliefs besides this. This is just an example. But if that's all there is to a belief, then what's in my notebook could be my belief, right? Other aspects to beliefs are like, roles that they play in our action, for example. A belief that there's Dr. Pepper in the fridge is the kind of thing that, in combination with a desire for Dr. Pepper, would lead someone to go to the fridge to get Dr. Pepper. Okay, so would my notebook fulfill that functional aspect of belief? Yeah, because if I can read, even if there's like nothing, that I can store permanently in my brain because of my condition, it seems like if I form the desire for Dr. Pepper, and I'm kind of looking over my notebook, I'm going to see, oh, there's Dr. Pepper in the fridge. I'm going to go. It's the kind of thing that could cause me, in combination with that desire, could cause me to go to the fridge to get that Dr. Pepper. So that's the view, and it looks like if you're a functionalist about mental states, this is plausible. Weirdly, I've got my flip phone here, but I assume I actually technically can access the internet on this thing. But for those of y'all with smartphones, it's the same thing, right? If a belief is the kind of thing that, in combination with a desire for something could produce action of a certain sort, suppose you don't have any beliefs about whether there's a Wendy's within 5 miles. You're driving on the interstate or something like that. So you don't have a belief in your head, that is. Okay. But you do have a desire for Wendy's, as all red-blooded Americans do. And you've got this device in your hand where you can very quickly access information about where the Wendy's are. Okay. Probably y'all could do it in the next 5 seconds. And you look it up and it says there's a Wendy's 2.3 miles from here. Okay, so look, we're very reluctant to call that a belief. And this is, I think, why I think we're going to be ultimately skeptical of this view, but it's really fun to read crazy views sometimes. Let's just throw it out there. But it doesn't seem like you have a belief that there's a Wendy's before you look that up on your phone. Eventually, obviously, you realize, oh, there's a Wendy's a little over 2 miles from here. And then you get the belief in your head. But what Clark is committed to is you actually might have that belief before it comes into your head, right? Because you've got this thing, this phone, access to this information that in combination with your desire for Wendy's could within seconds produce your action of pulling off and pursuing going to the Wendy's, right? So it's sort of like, look, here's something we already know. You have lots of beliefs right now that you're not immediately accessing, right? I guarantee it, right? Right now it's 7:33 by my watch. I guarantee right now, as I say this, you're not thinking about whether there's a pink elephant in the room. Now you are that I said it, right? But you had the belief before I said it that there were no pink elephants in the room. You weren't thinking about that belief. You weren't accessing it actively. It wasn't in the forefront of your mind. You had no thoughts in your head about pink elephants, but you still believed, subconsciously, if you want to call it that there were no pink elephants in the room. So we know that there are certain beliefs that we have that we're not immediately accessing. So the fact that you're not immediately accessing what's on your phone is not an objection to it being a belief. It's doing all the same things that a belief in your head that you're not immediately accessing would be doing, Clark says. Look, if you actually have the belief that there's a Wendy's close to here, but you're not thinking about it, and you suddenly get the desire to go to Wendy's, in a few seconds you're going to form the intention to go get in the car and go to Wendy's, at least assuming that other conditions are met, that you don't have other things to do, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Well, it looks like the same conditions are met with your smartphone, right? You've got this thing right here, and once you form, say you form the desire for Wendy's, within a few seconds, you're going to form an intention to go to Wendy's because you're going to look it up on your phone, not this phone, and it's going to say, oh, Wendy's over there. Oh, okay, cool, it's over there. And so Clark is going to say, it looks to me like the phone is performing all the same roles as your belief that there's a Wendy's close by, the belief in your head, that is. So case one, you don't have any belief. You're on the interstate. You don't have any belief about where the Wendy's are, where the Wendy's is, but it's right there on your phone because you have the internet on your phone. Case two, you actually know that there's a Wendy's in your head, that is. You have that belief. he says, in both cases, throw a desire for Wendy's into the mix and you're going to get the exact same results. You're going to get the exact same results. You're going to pull off. You're going to go do this. You're going to go in the exact same place. And so if the state, in the one case, it's in your head, and in the other case, it's in your phone. But in both cases, it's doing the exact same things. Introduce a desire, it produces this result. Introduce someone contradicting you that there's not actually a Wendy's there, and it produces the same result. So why, Clark says, would we not call what's in your phone a belief of yours, even when it's not in your head, right? So that's just to say, Clark is arguing for this wild thesis that your mind extends beyond your brain and, in fact, outside the boundaries of your body, so to speak. But two really weird implications. Do you believe everything in your phone? It seems to be one of the weird implications of the view is that if you have a smartphone that goes with you everywhere and that is constantly charged, at least, and it's not this phone that I have, those things should all count as beliefs that you have. And in fact, you know lots of stuff. In fact, y'all know way more than me in virtue of having those phones, because I cannot immediately look that up wherever I am. Second, Otto, we haven't talked about this case yet. This is one of Clark's cases from a different paper, so not from the chapter that y'all read. Otto is a guy who has Alzheimer's and keeps track of everything in a notebook and carries it with him everywhere he goes. And Clark wants to say, yeah, those are all his beliefs for the same reasons that we just walked through. I'm not going to re-walk through them with the smartphone. You can see it's doing the same thing. If someone comes in while he's asleep and erases a bunch and changes a lot, right? Changes the location of the Wendy's and all this, and he wakes up, have his beliefs changed just because what's in the notebook has changed? Seems to be that Clark is committed to saying yes, his beliefs have changed, and that's kind of wild. It's wild. It's just kind of a wild view in general. But again, I think it's really instructive to consider these wild views. It's not just fun. I think it is kind of fun, but it's instructive because it helps us see if you think that if you're still committed to it being incorrect, to being wrong. It's interesting to see where it goes wrong, and it's going to teach you a lot about the subject matter. Where do you think it goes wrong? Where do you think this argument goes wrong? Is it that mental states should not be defined functionally? Okay, well, you just learned something. We just learned that there's some non-functional aspect to mental states. But it's also hard because we don't want to define mental states as states that are caused or states that are constituted by certain brain states for the alien reason, for the angel reason, for the God reason, right? That we talked about earlier. And so we're in a little bit of a pickle, right? We got to decide. I think we've learned that if you want to deny this view, you kind of need to deny functionalism about mental states. But you don't want to tie mental states essentially to the way they're constituted in humans. And so what makes something a belief then? What makes something a desire? Is it the way that it feels? That might be kind of bad because desires and beliefs might feel differently to different people, especially people with weird disorders and stuff. We don't want to say that they don't have desires and beliefs. Anyway, that's all just food for thought, and I'm going to wrap up now.